Hey, Luke here. In this video we're going to be talking about wind orientations, so how we interact with the wind kiteboarding, our points of sail, the directions that we take. And so hopefully I'll give you some tips in this video about if you're a beginner, what you can look for when you're assessing the conditions and things like that, and even a couple of tips just to help improve your riding, just understanding these wind directions and orientations. So down here on the beach, and straight away when you land on the beach, you should be able to identify where the wind is coming from. So today the wind is coming from this direction. I can feel it on my face, and so we're going to be doing a bit of an example just with this particular wind direction with this beach setup, but this would be, this is true for every single beach anywhere that you are. You can sort of just try and work out how this, how orientations relate to your particular spot, and what we're going to go through, of course, right now. So first of all, if we draw a big circle, like we just mentioned, today what we've got is we've got the wind direction coming down through like this. So this is our wind direction blowing down here. Now, when we're kiteboarding, you may already know that typically what we're doing is we're actually heading perpendicular to the wind, and we head across it like this. So this is sort of our directions. Now, if we think about wind as mass and we're flying our kite, then naturally what the kite wants to do is travel with the wind. So if we were to release the kite completely from ourselves, or just lift it up off the beach, just like anything, it's going to sail with the wind. As that wind mass, as those air particles are hitting the kite, it's going to travel directly in this direction. Right? That's the way the wind's going. Anything that's loose with the wind is going to blow down that way. However, with our own body weight and our edge control on our board, or when we're body dragging with the kite, we can actually travel across the wind or perpendicular to the wind. Now this is actually called, in sailing terms, a beam reach. However, as you know, you can also travel any of these directions. You can kiteboard downwind a little bit like this, okay? Or as you start to get good, you can also kite upwind a little bit like this. Now this is called a broad reach or a close reach, and what this is doing here is, when we're talking about tacking upwind, this is really what we're talking about. We've got the wind direction, and then we can ride basically across the wind or perpendicular to the wind. However, within this range we can also edge a little bit upwind, or we can also come sort of a little bit downwind. The kite likes to sort of fly in this type of range here. Now there's also a no-go zone, and the no-go zone is sort of this area here. Now depending on your kite and depending on the board you're riding, it's going to depend how close to the wind that you can get. So how far you can tack upwind. You see a lot of the foil boards these days really keeping very close to the wind, and they can tack very close to the wind upwind. However, if you're new to kiteboarding, you may be struggling to stay upwind at all, or maybe you're on a surfboard and you can really get a little bit closer to the wind as well. So depending on your gear is going to change a little bit here, but this area through here, as a sort of common rule, is impossible to kiteboard up into. And the reason is that the kite is really getting pushed downwind, and we're using our edge and body trying to go upwind, but we can't get this close to the wind. We can't ride straight up into the wind. Now, this is important to know for a couple of different reasons. If you're struggling to stay upwind, okay, when you're kiteboarding, or you're struggling to recover your board while you're body dragging, it may be that you're trying to go too close to the wind. If you turn your board or your body drag too far up, too close, trying to head straight upwind, what happens is, instead of actually making any ground at all, it changes and it actually starts pulling you straight downwind with the kite. So the kite changes in its ability to go across the wind and also tack upwind, and it starts pulling you directly downwind. Now, something very interesting happens with this wind orientation diagram. As you can see, we've got the wind blowing directly down this way at the moment. This is the wind direction, this is the true wind. The planet is producing this wind and it's rushing from over there to over there. That's how the wind works. Something very interesting happens when we start going across the wind. So once we've got our kite and we start actually riding, we start generating wind of our own. And that wind, in combination with the true wind, which is the wind that's blowing at the moment, as we start to travel, we start to produce wind that's hitting us in the face, and the combination of those two create your apparent wind. And your apparent wind is exactly that, a direct combination of the wind that you're creating, or the travel of the motion that you're traveling, and also the true wind hitting you. Wind can't hit you from two places at once though. So you don't feel, when you're riding along, you don't feel a little bit of wind hitting you on here and then a little bit of wind hitting you here. Instead it just morphs into one direction. So why that is so interesting is that the faster you go, the more this diagram changes. So if you can see here, this is the true wind direction. Let's say that the wind is blowing at 15 knots. And then let's say that we hop on our board and we start traveling this way at 15 knots. Now, instead of the wind direction being here, the wind direction is going to come from here. So our apparent wind direction is now traveling this way. Because our apparent wind is now traveling this way, going 15 knots of forward motion that way, plus the wind traveling this way, we have an apparent wind coming from this angle now, or seemingly an angle. And of course, as we slow down, if we stop, then the wind will start coming from this way. If we were to increase our speed even further, then the wind would even come further around this way. But what's important to note here is that this direction now becomes our wind direction. And when that becomes our wind direction, it means that our riding direction has changed, perpendicular to the new wind direction. Now, when this has now changed, as you can see, this is our new riding direction. So to give you a sort of real life sort of outlook on this, I'm standing on the beach, wind's at my back. I start to take off and I'm riding along that way. If I was going directly perpendicular to the wind, I would be heading straight out there. But I start to increase my speed, and if I can't increase my edge control, if I can't increase my upwind ability, the wind starts to shift around, which means I start to lose ground on the beach and actually start heading further down. So why that is really good to note is that if you're having trouble staying upwind, then the number one thing to do is to slow down. Because as we start to increase our own speed, we start to actually push ourselves further and further down as that wind direction changes. So one of the tips that I wanted to cover today is that in order to stay upwind easier, slow down. If you slow down, it keeps closer to the true wind direction, which means it makes it easier to stay upwind. Regardless, as we move, so this is when we're coming back as well, it's changing that wind orientation. Now, there's a couple of other reasons why this is important. Let's say that we've just arrived at the beach, so understanding the sailing directions, it's a good safety sort of step just to think about what is at the wind orientation here today and how does that relate to my local environment? How does that relate to the water that I'm going to be on? So if we just draw another diagram here. So at this beach, we've got the beach sort of coming down the coast like this. So this is the beach direction. Then we've got the wind coming across like this. That's our wind direction. So what we know is that we've got the wind sort of slightly blowing on shore. We know without adding our apparent wind, so just with no speed, we know that this is perpendicular to the wind. And if we're a capable kiteboarder, then we're going to be able to sort of go upwind a little bit, maybe even tack up the beach. So we can tack up here, and then we'll come back up here like this. We get to this point on the beach, and then we can go further up. And if we're still learning as a kiteboarder, then we might find that we lose a little bit of ground when we go out. We come down the beach, we hit it here, we go back out, we lose a little bit of ground, come down the beach like this. And so we start to lose a little bit of ground. So knowing your own personal ability and how good you are at staying upwind, you can immediately assess, knowing your wind, this diagram or your orientations, whether or not it's going to be safe for you to go out. Okay, and so one last tip that we did briefly touch on is body dragging. Let's just draw another diagram. So if you're having trouble body dragging back to your board, we've just got to remember that no-go zone. So we've got the wind direction coming down through here. And remember, when you're body dragging, you're not creating a lot of your own speed, so it will be pretty close to the true wind direction. So here's our perpendicular line. This is our no-go zone. And what this means is, if you're having trouble, let's say you're sitting here in the water, your kite's sort of flying over here somewhere, and you've dropped your board and your board's here. If you try and turn around and just body drag straight back up to here, what happens is the kite doesn't travel across the wind window, and it actually starts pulling you straight back down. Okay, it pulls you downwind. And so if you're having trouble recovering your board, sometimes less is more. You might need to just take it easy and actually try and remember to stay within this perpendicular, slightly upwind area. And what that means is you can just start to head across the wind like this. You might need to tack all the way out to there, turn around, and then come back across like this. So a little bit less with your body and your arms. Sometimes, if I've been kiting for about 4 hours, I actually have a little break when I lose my board. I just sort of drape in the water and just very gently body drag across, and you can come right back to your board really, really quickly. So sometimes, honestly, less is more when you're trying to recover your board. And the one last thing actually I just want to cover is knowing your wind orientations is really good for your launching as well. So if this is all new to you, sometimes it might be good just to draw a little diagram like this for yourself. You arrive on the beach, you can feel the breeze in your hair or in your face, draw a little circle even with your foot, and then draw that wind line. Draw the wind direction for yourself, draw a line directly across it, and then that's going to be a really good indication of where you would launch from. So you pump up your kite and then you head across. So if you're trying to work out, how do I get across the wind, where do I launch from? That's another really good way you can just sort of map that out before you launch. So look, hopefully there's some good tips in there for you. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in coming videos.